In 1971, two small stone heads were discovered buried in the garden of a house in northern England. At first, they didn't seem especially important, just rough carvings made from stone. But not long after the objects were brought inside the home, strange reports began to emerge around the family. Unusual sounds, unsettling experiences, and incidents that quickly transformed a simple discovery into one of the strangest artifact cases in British folklore. Because according to some accounts, the problems only began after the heads were moved. The discovery happened in the town of Hexham, located in Northumberland, England. During work outside the family home, two young boys reportedly uncovered a pair of small carved stone heads buried in the garden near the property. The objects were unusual, but not dramatic at first glance. Each head was only a few inches tall, roughly shaped, and carved from stone with exaggerated facial features. Their appearance was primitive, almost ancient, with deep-set eyes and distorted expressions that immediately stood out from ordinary decorative objects. The boys brought the heads inside and showed them to their parents. At first, the discovery was treated more as a curiosity than anything mysterious, but that changed quickly. According to later accounts, strange incidents reportedly began occurring inside the house not long after the heads were moved indoors. The family described hearing unusual noises during the night. Some claimed doors opened unexpectedly. Others reported an increasing sense of discomfort around the objects themselves. At first, the events were dismissed individually. Old houses produce sounds, objects get misplaced, people become uneasy after unusual discoveries. But over time, the stories surrounding the stone heads became increasingly specific. And according to some reports, the most disturbing incidents happened after dark. One account described sightings of a large animal-like figure moving through parts of the home during the night. Another claimed that the atmosphere around the objects felt intensely unsettling, even when nothing visible was happening. The details varied depending on who told the story, but the pattern remained consistent. The strange experiences allegedly began only after the heads were discovered. And as interest in the objects grew, so did questions about where they had originally come from, because no one could clearly explain why the carvings had been buried there in the first place. As news of the discovery spread, the Hexham Heads quickly attracted attention beyond the local area. Researchers, collectors, and individuals interested in folklore all became curious about the objects, partly because of the reports surrounding them, but also because of the heads themselves. They didn't resemble modern carvings. Their appearance seemed older, cruder, difficult to place historically. Some believed the heads might have Celtic origins, possibly connected to ancient traditions involving carved stone figures. Others argued they were likely modern creations, mistakenly interpreted as something more mysterious. But no clear consensus was reached, and while debate continued over the object's origins, the stories connected to the house became increasingly unsettling. According to accounts from the family, unusual activity reportedly continued after the discovery. One of the most discussed claims involved sightings of a large creature-like figure inside or near the home, described by some as wolf-like in appearance. Other reports focus less on visible events and more on atmosphere, sudden fear, feelings of being watched, and disturbances during the night. Importantly, none of these claims were ever conclusively verified. There was no photographic evidence proving paranormal activity connected to the heads, and over time, many investigators suggested that growing media attention may have intensified fear and expectation around the objects. But even skeptics admitted something unusual had happened socially around the case, because the Hexham Heads rapidly transformed from a simple archaeological curiosity into a story people genuinely felt uncomfortable discussing. At one point, the heads were reportedly examined by experts interested in folklore and ancient artifacts. Yet even after analysis, uncertainty remained. No one could confidently determine exactly when the heads had been made, or why they had been buried beneath the property, and that uncertainty became part of the mystery itself, because once the story spread beyond the family home, the objects seemed to gain a strange reputation of their own, one built not on proven evidence, but on the growing number of people who claimed the heads never felt entirely ordinary. As interest in the Hexham Heads continued to grow, the objects reportedly changed hands several times. Researchers and investigators connected to folklore studies became involved, hoping to examine the carvings more closely and determine whether there was anything historically significant about them. But somewhere along the way, the story took another strange turn. The original heads disappeared, exactly when they vanished, and what ultimately happened to them has never been fully clarified. Some accounts claim the objects were misplaced after being transferred between researchers. Others suggest they may have been privately stored and simply lost over time. But regardless of the explanation, the result was the same. One of the most discussed mysterious artifact cases in Britain no longer had its central objects available for proper examination, and that only deepened the uncertainty surrounding the story, because without the original heads, many later discussions relied heavily on recollections, photographs, and second-hand descriptions rather than direct analysis. Skeptics argued this weakened the credibility of the more extraordinary claims attached to the case. Supporters, however, believe the disappearance only added another unsettling layer to the mystery. Over time, the Hexham Heads became difficult to separate from the folklore surrounding them. Some viewed the entire story as a combination of coincidence, fear, and media exaggeration amplified by public fascination with the paranormal during the 1970s. Others believed there was something genuinely unusual about the objects themselves, something that affected people after they were brought into the house. But because the original heads were no longer available, no modern investigation could fully revisit the case from the beginning. And perhaps that's one reason the mystery still survives today. Not because there is clear evidence proving anything supernatural happened, but because the most important part of the story eventually vanished along with the objects themselves. More than 50 years later, the Hexham Heads remain one of the strangest artifact mysteries in British folklore. To small stone carvings discovered beneath a garden, a series of unsettling reports that followed soon after, and objects that later disappeared before their origins were ever fully understood. So what do you think? Were the events surrounding the heads simply the result of fear and growing imagination? Or was there something genuinely unusual about the objects from the beginning? Let me know in the comments, because sometimes the most unsettling mysteries don't begin with massive events, but with small discoveries that never should have meant anything at all.